Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. When it comes to altered states, it is no mystery that many of us have access to these realms with no medicine necessary. Whether we're born with this access or we develop it later in our lives, more and more of us are becoming aware of this notion within our lives. And if you're like me, this process can be super confusing, as when we deal with qualitative aspects of life, such as the main topic of this week's discussion, the Akashic Records, it can be hard to know for sure if we're accessing the same state from person to person. This is why I am so excited to share with each of you today's guest, who is a woman that, along with being an Akashic Record reader, yoga teacher, intuitive healer, and more, is someone who has helped me dearly with my own health and well-being through her work, and has helped numerous individuals understand what states such as the Akashic Records are and how to access them. So please give me a big hand in welcoming my dear friend Kathleen Allen to the show. Kathleen Allen, I am so excited to have you here with me today. For everyone that's listening, like I said in the intro, Kathleen and I connected some months back, and we're going to dive into all the magic that she's brought into my life. But, really where I want to start this is considering that the nature of what you do is pretty psychedelic in and of itself, right? Reading the Akashic Records, things of that nature. Also, yoga as well is definitely a psychedelic in my mind because it creates union. But I'm really curious. I know you're really big into cannabis, and, of course I am too. For all the listeners, you guys know me. I'd love to hear how you got into cannabis first, right? And how maybe that led into yoga, or did yoga lead into cannabis? So kind of how this whole series of events that is now Kathleen in the modern day began to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that introduction. My journey with yoga really was the very first part of my spiritual journey, separate from kind of the religious stuff that I grew up in. But my introduction to cannabis was actually kind of, when I look back on it in hindsight, it was very much in a healing way from the get-go. I really connected with it for the first time when I was living abroad in Paris, and I was just going through a lot of personal growth, but also changing some patterns, dealing with some karma that was very much had to do with the physical location of being there. And I had a friend that lived in Amsterdam, and I was able to go visit. And all of a sudden it was like that kind of blanket of shame that kind of had covered it for me before was gone because we were in Amsterdam. And I was able to connect with it in a way that was just so different from, just a few times that I had, tried in high school. And I really very much immediately tapped into the introspection, and it was able to really help me to get that bird's eye view that now I very much associate with the Akashic Records, that zoomed out, bigger picture, stage notes of the play behind the scenes. And it really made a big difference for me. And that was when I started to incorporate it into my life, much more so by myself. I was never been a social thing for me. It actually makes me pretty uncomfortable to be around other people, just because that's the way that it works for me. It just helps me connect. So that was kind of the beginning. And then I stumbled into yoga. I say stumbled, it was very synchronistic. I showed up for a Pilates class one day because I decided that was what I was going to do. And it was canceled, and they put me in the yoga class next door instead. And one of those very, very first yoga classes, I went to an Ashtanga primary series, which is very typical of me to walk into kind of the most intense, advanced variation of whatever it is. But I had this amazing, blissful, I would say psychedelic experience in Shavasana after that very first class that now I chase and I get maybe once every few months. But it was so powerful, and it was such a powerful push of this is your path. There is something very meaningful here for you. And then I spent maybe 10 years saying that I just wanted a yoga butt and I didn't really care about any of the spirituality part, but it creeps up on you. And just really what I noticed was in 2010, I was on a work trip. I went to Thailand, And while I was there, I spent some extra time, practiced some yoga there, and something really shifted, I think maybe in a grid work capacity. But by the time I got home, it was around Lent. I grew up Catholic. And I said, oh, this year, instead of giving something up, I'm going to go to yoga every day for 40 days straight and see what happens. And it completely changed my life. Mm-hmm. I practice daily now. I'm a yoga teacher as well, but it really just gave me that every single day, that reset button, a touch point. And I do enjoy combining cannabis with the yoga as well. I think in terms of the body awareness, I think there's a lot of value there for sure.
Oh my goodness, Kathleen, that's so awesome because there's so many parallels between our journeys. Not only did I want a yoga butt too, no, I'm just kidding, but it's so funny because for me, as soon as I found cannabis, I found my body, and if you look into the history of cannabis with, its relation to the Hindu god Shiva, it's all about getting into the body, right? Like literally Yogananda's lineage, the Self-Realization Fellowship. I have a friend who is very close, right? They used to be very close with Babaji and a couple of other people in his lineage. And he always said, he goes, Yogananda was a huge fan of cannabis for meditation. Like that was his big thing, meditation and yoga, right? Essentially Kriya Yoga. When you can go to a different place like Amsterdam, right, that doesn't have all of the baggage that America has with regards to the war on drugs, that ridiculous thing and all of this stuff, how all of a sudden, because you're now around people that are normalized it, right, have normalized it, it's a totally different experience, and that's like what I'm really excited to continue seeing the world open up to, not just with cannabis, but with all psychedelics, right, that like actually taking random pharmaceuticals that have a whole host of side effects is the weird thing. Like that's actually the weird thing, the dangerous thing, etc. Of course, there are always things we want to be careful with psychedelics, but when we compare them to pharmaceuticals, the safety is ridiculous in comparison to one another. So I'm glad that, you were able to go to that Amsterdam experience at that age and, have that experience of no shame, no guilt, etc. And one thing I'm curious for you on, you mentioned that when you were in that yoga class, how like you had that feeling of like, wow, this is what I want to do. Can you explain that feeling a little bit? Because I always refer to this as like feeling a fuck yes from the heart, right? But like, this is something I get asked about often is like, well, how do you know when you found your quote unquote purpose, right? And of course, you guys have heard me talk about purpose before, how we have an inner purpose and an outer purpose. Our inner purpose is to wake up. Our outer purpose is wherever that inner purpose leads us. But I'd love if you could share with us like what that feeling felt like to you. And if you felt it since, like, how you've been able to connect with that feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't actually necessarily thought about it this way before, but when I think about it now with your question, it really feels so similar to the frequency of the Akashic field. I'm getting so much confirmation in my body right now that, yeah, duh. Because what it was, the way that I experienced it at that time, I think I was 17 or 18. I felt just this blankness, but this very loving, non-judgmental, neutral, like I've used this term divine neutrality, and I don't know if it's something that I came up with. Probably not, but it feels very resonant to me because there is something so powerful about being able to, take in all of this different information and hold your energy strong in the center without kind of being concerned about it. I don't know how to say that a little bit better, but just being so sure in your higher level perspective that that you're seeing all of the sides. And if you're seeing all the sides, how could you be anything but neutral? And that is so much of what the Akashic Records feels like, that frequency. And so I experienced it in that moment in that yoga class as just maybe 2 or 3 minutes of lost time, of flow, of blankness, of a really deep meditative state that I hadn't felt at that point. And now it's a state that I can tap into pretty easily. But it was definitely a little bit of a hint that this is where you want to be. And this is a way to get there. There are probably other ways too, but if we just showed you one way that you can get there, and I went very, very head first into that one way.
Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session And you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show. You know, it's so cool too, because this is what I tell everyone. I go, you'll know when you find something that resonates because you'll feel a feeling that is really good. Like, that is how I imagine the universe, our soul, God, whatever you want to call, that aspect of you that's higher or more powerful than you. It's like that aspect really speaks in terms of positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement, right? Like, there've been many times where I thought I wanted to do something that my analytical or logical mind had convinced me that was the right move. And when I'm doing it, I'm just feel like I'm paddling upstream. Like, I'll give an example too, like just for anyone listening of like what this can actually look like. But, it was like 2021 and we were looking to build out a program, right? Me and Alex, and we weren't on the cannabis stuff yet. Of course, I was talking about it and everything, but I hadn't decided that I could do a cannabis program. So we were trying to build a different program and it just felt like paddling upstream. And once we tapped into cannabis, it was like that feeling of like, oh my God, I want to feel more of this. So naturally, those feelings will bring you more towards what those feelings are in alignment with. And so I love that you can articulate that. And you were mentioning the Akashic Records, and, obviously we're going to dive into this so deep, and I'm sure the listeners are chafing at the bit to hear more about it, because this is a topic that I feel is, there's so many people talking about it, and there's people talking about it in different ways. And in my experience working with you, it has been nothing short of profound and also very simple. Like, I think when a lot of people hear this term, the Akashic Records, they think that it's got to be something that only certain people have access to, that it's some grandiose experience, et cetera. And it can be, right? It can be that grandiose experience. But I'd love if you could just blow the lid, right, on what you understand the Akashic Records to be. And then, of course, we can dive into how you got started diving into that and all the other juicy stuff that comes along with that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I get that question a lot. What are the Akashic Records? And even though it's my favorite place, it can be a little bit hard to describe because it's not a place, first of all. Yeah. It's a frequency. I've heard it described as the 11th dimension. But really, the way that you access the Akashic Records is an internal process, a meditative process. I have a tuning in where I call upon guides. I have a little opening prayer. But really what it is very consciously tuning into my chakras and intentionally raising my vibration to be a match to that field. And my very first experience with it was where I kind of realized it was right after my Kundalini awakening. But what I found was I felt this major shift. The energy felt very different, very warm and inviting and just trusting and full of love and open. And I somehow intuitively knew to start asking questions, and I was getting answers back in my own voice, very much claircognizant answers. I really hadn't developed any of my clairvoyance yet at that point. But really what the Akashic Records are is a cloud drive. That's the way I think of it, of your soul's entire history, your journey, your origins, whether, here on earth, in other multidimensional realms, experiences with every person you've ever interacted with in those lives, the contracts that you've made, the timing that you've kind of messed around with people where, we're going to meet this and we're going to do this together. And this is going to help each other's evolution in certain ways. That there's a lot of information there, which is then, it can be a little bit overwhelming. I know for some people, when they start to practice accessing the Akashic Records, it makes them a little bit nauseous because that frequency mismatch, it is so high vibrational of a field. But what's really nice is once you get in there, you have help. So we have the record keepers who are like the librarians, if you like the analogy of the Akashic Records as a library, which doesn't personally resonate, but I do like the idea of the librarians.
Yeah.
Where kind of I'm able to take my frequency up to a certain point and they're able to bring their frequency down a certain point so that we can meet in the middle. So if you have a question, I can ask that question on your behalf to the record keepers, and I can get to that level and they can take it one level further where they have access to all that information. They kind of pick and choose. They pull the book off the shelf of what they think you can handle, what they think that is going to be most beneficial for you right now. And then they give that to me and I relay it back to you. So I know it sounds kind of cumbersome. It's actually a very, very fast process. I'm always surprised at how much information and how much we can get through in a single session, because once we start flowing, and it really is just, sometimes it just feels like me channeling your higher self as well. It's kind of an intermediary, because up in that place, it's kind of all the same. It's, we're all one. We're so close. We're so removed from that separation and duality when we're up there that it just flows so easily.
Yeah, I 100%, like my experience with it, so far. And it's funny because I didn't know that I was accessing this realm, very similar to you the first time you did it. But I remember the first time it happened, I was on a very large mushroom dose. I had done a 15-gram tea with a couple of friends. This was a little bit before, for anyone who's listening, the 18-gram tea that I talk about often, that I thought I was dying that time. That was a very big challenge. But before that, it was the first tea we had ever done. We would just usually eat mushrooms. And so this was the first tea we ever did. And I remember it was on New Year's. I forget what year, but basically me and two of my friends did this tea. And I remember we got rocked. We had no idea what was going to happen because we had never taken that many mushrooms and we had also never done a tea. So the thing is about mushroom teas, they slam you all at once, because the lemon, because we made a lemon tech tea, the lemon will convert the psilocybin into psilocin. So it's kind of like if you take cannabis and you bake it in the oven for 20 minutes, it pre-decarboxylates it from THCA to delta 9 THC. So that when you intake it, it doesn't have to be converted by the liver. It's just there. So basically, about 4 hours into the experience, as soon as I peaked and started coming down just a tiny bit, like literally a 0.1%, all of a sudden I was just on my back and I was just laying there looking at my ceiling. I didn't even need to blink. It felt like I was just so tapped in. And I remember that it was funny because I started asking questions, but before I could even finish the question, I had the answer. And it was like a knowing. It was a claircognizance knowing. And so it's funny you mentioned claircognizance too, because that was the first one that I just naturally had access to. And when I realized that, oh, wow, I've connected to this realm so many times in the past in fleeting moments, or maybe for half a day, or maybe even for a full day. There was a time in 2019 after I had this experience where the first couple of times I tapped into it, I still didn't know that I was tapping into it at this point. But there was a time in 2019 where I went through a gigantic Kundalini awakening, whatever you want to call it. I'm not exactly sure what terminology to put to it, but basically what happened was I was in that zone for 2 weeks and I could have any answer I wanted. I was in complete bliss. And Aaron Abke talks about this a lot too, about how he went through a very similar thing. And then eventually I fell from that, which was okay, and found that okay, well, I can get there on mushrooms and I can get there with cannabis. And then the last 4 years has been me training myself to be able to get there without anything. And I remember one of the first times I really knew that I had accessed it in a sober state was I was training with this psychic named Krishanti. Super cool woman from California. And my friend Chase had worked with her and recommended her. And I was like, yeah, fuck me up. Let's go. And so we went up there to meet my power animal one time. And we were in the Akashic Zone before. I'm not sure if we were still in there at this point. But we go up there and all I saw was peacock feathers. And, of course, being a guy, I'm like, well, I thought it was a lion or a bear or a wolf, right? So I see the peacock and I could tell that it wasn't an ego thing because my ego would not want to see a peacock. But I was like, I think I'm seeing a peacock. And she was like, oh, yeah, peacock's, power animal. I was like, cool. And then when we were finishing up our call, I had the animal spirit deck next to me. I was like, hey, Krishanti, I just got this knowing. I was like, I'm going to pull from the animal deck after. I'm going to get the peacock and I'll text you when I do. And she was like, okay. And so literally I lay out the animal deck. I spread all the cards out. I use my intuition, pull a card, peacock, first time. And I was like, okay, that is definitely accurate. So it's funny talking about these experiences. I think for many of you listening too, maybe you have experienced this, but again, these things they're really hard to quantify because they're more qualitative in nature. You can't measure oh, you were 95% in the Akashic Zone, right? It's hard to do that. It's more of a cooking than baking type thing. But I think that all of us experience, either moments or can potentially whole days, months, et cetera, in these states. And that's why it's so great to talk about them, because we can decouple them and demystify them for other people as well.
Right. Because it really is so hard to know. It really is so hard to know until you develop that level of trust with yourself. And that's a moving target. There are times where I'll be in a reading and I'll have a piece of information come through that, it sounds crazy to me. Either it's illogical or it's just way out there. And just with time and practice, you just get more and more comfortable just saying it anyway. And you get that validation from the client being, explaining why it makes sense when you would have never been able to make that connection. But you get those little pieces of validation. And over time, it just becomes a little bit more of a reflex. You don't have to, there's not so thick of a layer of questioning in between for every piece of information. You start to be very comfortable with, if it came to me, then there was a reason that it came to me. And there's also just one of the tiny pieces so Amy Belair, who I found you through, she's so wonderful.
Yeah, she's awesome.
Something that she explained that like cracked this open for me was, if you go through the exercise of trying to fabricate a scenario, like you were writing a short story, noticing what that feels like, and then comparing that to when you get a piece of psychic information. It's very different trying to work to make the details fit. You can feel the difference in your brain trying to fabricate it versus receive it. And that has been just a very simple way to be like, was I writing a short story? No, I wasn't. Definitely not.
Yeah, I like that a lot because it's the idea of like pulling versus pushing. Mm-hmm. It's like when you're trying, it's pushing, right? And that's not a bad thing, right? Like sometimes we're coming from a different part of our consciousness or different part of the mind, etc. But when you're in that kind of realm, it feels like you're getting pulled. Like even the other day, I was writing a webinar for the new launch of the CCC we're doing in May or June, and all of a sudden, like, it was like, okay, I started it. I could feel it was kind of pushy. And then I had a little bit of espresso. And all of a sudden, boom, I just get into this area where I'm just nerding out. I have no problem putting all of my focus in one spot, flow state galore. And all of a sudden, I'm like, boom, I just wrote the whole webinar. Holy shit, right? So it's like those kind of times where like, I can always tell the second I wake up every day, is this going to be a pusher day or a puller day, And sometimes that's okay, right? To have a push day, but at the same time, like I know that when I'm in the most alignment with all parts of me, I'm in that zone of getting pulled towards things and responding to my environment rather than trying to find what to respond to. It's a big difference. It's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many synchronicities that feel that way where you're, sometimes it just feels like spontaneity for me, that pull to do something where an idea pops in your head. Intuitive eating has been really helpful for me to lean into my general intuition because it's something that we don't give as much thought about, I feel like I without thinking about it, I'll grab an orange off the counter and be like, oh, that was something that my body was doing. And that was an intuitive thing. And how can I extrapolate that into the rest of my life? And when I feel like, oh, maybe I want to go for a walk there or go visit or call somebody, knowing that those are often little nudges and little pushes from elsewhere.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's one of the coolest parts of life too, because we all hear these things like, there's more going on here than meets the eye, or, we're God in human form, or these kind of things. But I think at the end of the day, like when you can tap into that amount of wisdom, it just creates such a beautiful surrender experiment in life. And that's why I love that book, The Surrender Experiment, because I think that's a perfect rendition or articulation of what we're speaking about here, about being pulled from the inside, from something deeper within you, and what that can do. And have you ever read The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer before?
Oh, I've read, what was his other book? I read the other one, The Untethered Soul. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And it's so cool because I loved that book too. But The Surrender Experiment, I didn't, I read it after The Untethered Soul. I was going through a program called Training Camp for the Soul, and they recommended reading The Untethered Soul. So I read it and I was like, cool, that's really awesome. And then I found he had this other book that I had never heard about before called The Surrender Experiment. And I was like, oh, I'll check that out. And that became my favorite book of all time. Like it's just such an amazing book. And there's so many cool things in it that really allow you to understand like that process, right, of surrendering to things and what that looks like. And I just think it's really cool because at the end of the day, like a really good example of, how this hits close to home for me is the work that we did together. This is a perfect rendition of pushing versus pulling, where I had for everyone listening, I had these headaches. I think I've mentioned them on the show before, but I had headaches that were pretty intense since 2017. And when I first got them, they were every day because I was very out of alignment with listening to this source within me. And I think that's honestly like really what these headaches were meant for, at least how I'm seeing them. Like they were there because there was something that was looking to pull me away, right? Push me away from what I was actually looking to do in life. And that's how you framed it, right? Is like this implant that you found in the base of my skull, which we'll get into in a second, was kind of a distraction.
Mm-hmm.
And 100% that's how it felt. Like it just felt like that constant thing that the second I woke up, before I could, figure out what I was going to do that day or what was beautiful about that day, it was like, oh, there's that headache again. And it was like that first point of focus in the morning every single day. And then, after a while, it got a certain amount better when I left my job and started getting more in alignment with who I was and who I was meant to be, but it was still there. And there was a certain point where I just kind of was like, all right, I'm just going to surrender to it. I've tried all the things, I'm not going to keep stressing myself out trying to pay all this money to like chiropractors and acupuncturists and massage therapists. So I would get them like once a month, and I would usually have to drink extra espresso or whatever to get it to go away. Definitely annoying. And then when we met, you were like, hey, I'd love to give you a reading. I was like, this is awesome. And so I had no expectations, right? Because I was a blank slate and I was like, this is awesome. And so I mentioned, I was like, yeah, I get these headaches every once in a while. They're not that big of a deal as much anymore as they were like a couple of years ago. But you were like, well, let's check in. And you immediately found this energetic implant and you removed it. And I was like, hey, you know what? Like, we'll see what happens, right? I'm just surrendered to it. And literally ever since then, it's been every single day I've not had a headache. I had a little bit of one day, but it was a totally different space in my head. And it was just from dehydration from using the sauna too much. But, again, like that base of skull annoying right through to the right eye thing that I had for years is completely gone. And so I'd love if you could explain a little bit about that process, like maybe how you saw it, what the process of removal is, and what an energetic implant is. I know we talked about this on our live and people really enjoyed hearing about it. So I'd love if you could share it here too.
Yeah, absolutely. Energetic implant is a good way to say it. Another kind of term I've heard is a holographic astral interference device, which is a mouthful. So we say implant. But essentially it's usually something from the astral that is put into some layer of our energetic body. And essentially, it just causes a distortion. You think about, if you were to physically stick an item into your energetic field, into your aura, your energy would kind of have to warp around it in order to try to repair that damage. But things just wouldn't function exactly the way that they're supposed to. And what I've found is that when I tune into somebody's field and I look at their chakras, a lot of times they will have a specific problem right where I see what I describe as kind of a digital interference. It has an energetic signature that appears to me like a little bit staticky, almost like a little bit gray and metal. And it has the same feeling as when I pick up like AI attachments. And I say AI, like, stuff that you pick up when you're scrolling through TikTok and Instagram, and it kind of latches on. And a lot of times that's just some looping thoughts. That's typically those ones in your brain. But some of the more insidious ones can be in different layers of your energetic body. And the one for you, the implants are designed to be a little bit hard to find. So if you're going to a normal practitioner and you're going to do an energy clearing, a chakra tuning, they might look at all your chakras and everything looks fine. They clear your energy and send you on your way. It's one of those things, if you're not looking for it, and if you kind of don't know what they look like, they can be very sneaky because they're designed to be. But this was one of the very first things that I was introduced to after my awakening, because I woke up and I just knew that I ended up having several, but I knew that I had an implant somehow and I needed to have it removed. And I found somebody that really helped me to understand a little bit more about them. But as soon as I saw one time in one client, I was able to see it, and I was able to look for it and immediately pick it up in further clients. And I'm still creating my little Rolodex of them, and I still pick up new ones all the time, but there are several that are, repetitive. And yours in particular, so what I'm guided to, yours looked like it was like a little camera slot, or like a slot where you put in a camera memory card. I think is how I described it. But it was a little blue, thin, triangular disc in the back of your skull, and the guidance, which normally I would want to pull it out. The guidance was to push it in and let it pop back out in order that it would just be ejected. And that's the thing about the implants that always feels very different to me than typical like chakra blocks or things where we have trauma stored. There's like a latch that needs to be undone or a screw that needs to be unscrewed. Actually, right after our session, when I removed that implant for you, I was really, really focused on this because I was guided to remove a crown chakra implant for the collective. I was meditating and I was shown, and I was a little bit confused at first because I was like, whose implant are you showing me? And then the message was clear, like, no, this is kind of universal here. And it looked like in Green Mile, it looked like that electric chair headpiece where you put the sponge underneath, and it had these latches down the side, and I had to undo these latches in a specific order and remove it. And it was basically just allowing an extra, it was preventing a layer of information coming in through the crown. So there are, I'm sure a lot of places where these can be. Sometimes I can tie them to a certain group. I see some that are associated with the, secret space program. I see some that are associated with some of these new age groups or these mystery schools that are a little bit warped. I see some, military. I've seen some with military stuff. And then it's kind of still growing, but the great thing is once they're removed, the energy starts flowing again almost immediately. It's so satisfying because it very much gets removed. You press a button, eject, you hit that eject button, and like, woof, it like everything kind of reestablishes homeostasis.
I love that. Yeah. And that's exactly what I felt too. It was like I do a lot of meridian work when it comes to acupuncture and whatnot. And that's why I knew, I was like, there's just something else going on here, because I threw everything at this thing. I literally went to 3 different chiropractors, 4 different acupuncturists, like at least 5 different massage therapists. I also went to the typical medical approach when it first happened and tried to figure out what was going on. I went to Rolfers. I went to everyone. Yeah. And I was just like, there's nothing like that I am leaving unturned here, no stone unturned. So I'm like, all right, that's what showed me like there's got to be something going on. And I had tried tuning fork therapy. I had tried emotion code, body code. I had tried all these different energetic practices too. And that's why eventually I was like, all right, just screw it. I'm not going to keep getting distracted by this thing. And that's why when you took it out, it was like the next day that I woke up and I was like, whoa, I definitely feel something different. Like I feel like imagine if you had a crimped line in like your plumbing or something, and then all of a sudden it got uncrimped, like what that would feel like, if your house could feel.
That's almost exactly how I describe it. One of the things that I find now is I find little like look like metal staples, almost like you would use to clamp off an umbilical cord all the way up our chakras, kind of in between each one. And that's exactly what it does. It puts a kink in the hose of that energy. And the second that I remove it, people really can feel it too, especially people that aren't super energetically sensitive. And maybe they go do energy work, they go to Reiki, and maybe they feel a little relaxed afterwards, but they don't feel anything. I have people that don't expect to feel any of the energy work be a little bit surprised, because it's a little bit of a dam breaking. It's a lot of energy that was built up, and then woof, that was what I experienced when I had my Kundalini awakening, was kind of one of these being removed, and all of us, it was in my solar plexus, and then all of a sudden there were no further blocks, and my Kundalini go all up right through my crown. So, that's what I want. That's why I do this. That's what I want to help people with. I want to open up your chakras. I want to help you to unleash that, release that energy that's there, that's dormant, that has so much to teach us, that it's our birthright. We were supposed to be able to, let this energy free and let it transform us, in our 30s is kind of the idea. And it's so rare that people get to do it in that time period, unless you're really lucky and you do something like find yoga when you're 17 and fall head over heels in love with it. Yeah. So, to the extent that I can help people skip those 20 years, I will always recommend yoga for opening your energy meridians, but to the extent that I can force some of that energy flow through in a way that doesn't require quite so much, mindful eating and hydration and detoxing and all of that, that's what I love to do.
Yeah, 100%. It's like for me, what was 2019? 5 years ago. So about 27, 28 when I had my first like big Kundalini, type experience. And ever since then, I've talked to so many people. It's funny you brought up the solar plexus thing, because I have one gentleman that I'm thinking of that's in the Conscious Cannabis Collective, great guy. And he always talks about how he's very tapped in. He's a young kid. He's like 21, 22, but very tapped in. And he always talks about, he's like, Ryan, it feels like when I'm doing breath work or anything, I get right to the solar plexus and I can't get above that. And so when he first mentioned this, I was like, well, I imagine it's some kind of block, but I hadn't heard a reference to yet. And then there was someone else about a week and a half ago that I was doing a podcast with that mentioned that same thing. And I was like, okay, the universe is looking to tell me something here.
Yes, but it looks like a metal staple, almost like on a plastic bag of bread but like a heavy one, and it just kinks that line. It's specifically between the solar plexus and the heart. That's the most insidious one. It's the most powerful one to remove. That's the one where people feel it, because so much when you do a lot of clearing work and we clear out our root, we clear out the sacral, we get to that solar plexus, and then there's this last bit of personal power that we have to reclaim. It gets stuck there, and it's on purpose. That's the part about these implants that is difficult to discuss, because I don't like to go, put any fear into it. But the fact is, these are not organic. They're not supposed to be there, and they're holding us back. So yeah, that one in particular, letting that flow through to the heart, that changes everything, because our upper chakras are typically open already. And that's the sticking point right there in between the solar plexus and the heart.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I think I mentioned this to you on my live, but before we had done our work together, I was at a music festival in Maine in September. And I have a friend who draws auras, and she's extremely gifted. Like, she was like in and out of psych wards most of her life, because everyone just can't handle it when you have gifts like that. And one of the first things she said when she drew my aura was, she was like, wow, you got some rainbows in you and all these great things. I'm like, sick, that sounds great. She's like, yeah, but there is one thing. There's like this little blue thing at the back of your right skull. And so it was so funny when you described what you pulled out of there, because I was like, I literally have the drawing that like is the exact same shape on there. So it was really funny because, again, the ego, the mind, et cetera, especially for anyone listening who's like more left brain, it'll want to try to make sense of this. And it's above making sense, right? Like, it's completely makes sense, but from a different perspective than the Newtonian Cartesian way of thinking that most of us are in. It's much more quantum. It's much like, it really is a psychedelic to understand like how this stuff works and how you can actually start to really map this stuff out. And I'm curious for you, because I'm sure that I'm not the only one thinking of this, but is there any experience that really like calls out to you when I mentioned like, any wild experiences you've had that immediately comes to heart or mind when it comes to something that was just like otherworldly that transpired during any of these appointments, either for yourself or for clients, et cetera?
Definitely. I've had some really interesting kind of, once I get to the galactic side of things get really interesting for me. That's just, it's one of those things where there is extra value for me because I have very little trust in anything I can read on the subject versus kind of, past lives. There's some historical context, but when you're talking about other realms, other planets, inner Earth stuff, you're just trying to gauge what you see and, filter it through your psyche the best that you can. And I had one client, he's incredible, very, very connected, Arcturian ascended master. And he had a list of questions. He was all business, very much a session more like, I sometimes will do a session more as a translator and sometimes more as a therapist. And this was very much a straight translation. He had his list of questions. I gave my answer. We moved on to the next one. And they were questions where, as he was asking them, I said, how could I possibly answer this question? But then there are the Akashic Records, and sometimes had to kind of fumble my way through describing it, and it always comes full circle eventually. But some getting to see some like real reptilians in my third eye was a big thing for me, because I know that I'm typically more on the light or leaning side of things. I'm only kind of dipping my toe into the dark right now, so I'm being shown what I can handle and maybe other people's records first. That was wild. And then just generally speaking, the thing that continues to blow my mind is the validation part. Because the number one thing that I think people get out of a session within the Akashic Records is the questions that they ask are always going to be intuitively based questions. They had an experience. They know that there's something extra to it, or there's a pattern, and they know that there's something that in their blind spot that they're not seeing about it. And what the Akashic Records do that's so amazing is they give you the answer. And then they give you this huge boost of confidence because you already knew that answer. So it really has this extra effect of boosting your intuition, boosting your confidence in your own intuition. And I gave this example to a client the other day. One of the most powerful Akashic Records sessions I ever had, I had picked up an entity, I think, and somebody made me aware of that. And of course, I was a little bit panicky. And the Akashic reader that I was working with at the time, she said, they're telling me you can clear this on your own. And that is the type of guidance that I have experienced in the Akashic Records that is unique. It's this extra level of, we're going to give you the information, but we're also going to give it to you in a way that we know is going to contribute towards your personal growth. And they're never going to give you, this big overinflated sense of ego. I had a past life that I've been working on, unraveling and teasing it out for a year, because if they had told me because the people involved are like a couple of, there's some historical figures in there, there's some actual history around these lives. I think that if I had known that back then, it would have been like way too much for my ego to incorporate. I had to look at all the themes, all the energetics, all the patterns in my life to then see, oh, well, here's this literal soap opera on TV that I can watch with these characters. That was me playing out these themes. So it's very, very cool when you can have something validated from this higher place that gives you an extra oomph to trust yourself, to continue on your spiritual path, to know that, yes, I am connected, I am psychic, all of this information is already available to me. I just need to open myself up to it.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly what I found too. Like so much validation, so much increase in confidence when it comes to intuition, and just being able to like really be my own guru, because at the end of the day, we all have that ability within us, right? And I think that, at least for me, I imagine for many other people too, we grew up in an era where it was like, well, you can't figure out your health yourself, go to a doctor, silly. You can't do your own taxes, go to a tax specialist, right? And I'm not saying that, like, for instance, for taxes, like I'm totally going to a specialist, like fuck that. But, again, it's like, what is the thing that we're in training ourselves to understand is that, like, if you're not a professional at something, don't even try to mess with it, right? And that's a very left brain way of thinking about things. Not to say that it's a bad way to think about things, right? Like if you don't know how to operate a dragster, you probably shouldn't get in it, right? So like there are definitely things that, logic can support with, but at the same time, when it comes to being able to be your own guru, be your own healer, et cetera, like this is exactly what we're here to remember how to do. Being able to tap into zones such as the Akashic zone and things like that, they really support us in being able to remember who and what we truly are as divine beings having a human experience, right? And so, it's been interesting for me, like, diving into this stuff, because just like you said, there's been so many things that have popped through that are just unmistakable. Like there's no way I could have thought of it. Like it happens all the time in small ways. Like Rachel and I will finish each other's sentences, or she'll be thinking something and I'll say it and she'll be like, I was just thinking that, like how, right? So it's like funny when you start tapping into this stuff, because like you said, I think a lot of people, especially when it comes to people that connect with psychedelics like I do, I expected that the Akashic Zone would be this huge thing, or that, I would get it all at once, or any of this stuff. But it's very similar to, like, I'll use a very left brain analogy. It's very similar to the gym, right? Like you can have a goal of what weight you want to lift, but you don't just start deadlifting 500 pounds your first time ever deadlifting, right? Like there's a process, because your body needs to be strong enough to be able to handle that so you don't hurt yourself. And when it comes to this stuff, it's like, if you don't know how to protect yourself, if you don't know how to be, clear with yourself when it comes to entities and things of that nature, then you really don't want to be diving super deep into this stuff. And that's the challenge with a lot of people with psychedelics, is that we know that these, medicines can open up these realms, but, a lot of times it can be too much at once. And I'm curious if, you've had to work with anyone that's maybe gone too far before, entity stories, things of that nature, just because, again, and for everyone listening, this isn't to instill fear in you. It's just to make sure we're balancing things, right? With some of the things in terms of like how to protect yourself and things of that nature. So I'm curious if you have any challenging stories like that have come forth, right? You just mentioned one of your own, but any others that come to heart or mind that you can share with the listeners?
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to, sometimes there's kind of medical things, like I think, can talk about some of these parasitic entities. There's that element. There's the entity part is a little bit separate. I can see the way that it plays in with the physical body, but I typically see very much through the lens of the physical body. I kind of lead with this medical intuition side. And then the piece that tends to be really helpful from the Akashic Records is it gives that context, the background. I have a problem with my hip, for example. It's just a little misaligned, but it's one of those things that kind of irks at me. And I was able to go in and see that not only was it kind of from a past life, I, literally shot in the butt with a poison arrow. And it's actually now exacerbated by my food sensitivities, which of course, but, it was one of those things where I got to see the pattern, and it wasn't just this one time. It was a recurring issue. And making that connection for my conscious mind was able to take a lot of the energetic charge out of it. Because a lot of times when we have something, whether it's an entity, an implant, even it's just a chakra block, when we're really overly focused on it, we can really just be feeding into it and giving it more of our energy. But taking that step back is so valuable. And that's where the Akashic Records show you the context. Maybe it's something that you planned. Maybe it was, I always, when you were talking about your implant, the thing that is, a little bit of an eye roll, the little ironic part is that it did have so much personal growth. It had so much wrapped up in there for you that you were forced to get super clean with your diet. And that's what my hip has done for me. I started my yoga teacher training and I was like, this will not do for my hip to be all of a sudden. Sometimes it'll be so tight that I can't do this. Most of the times it goes right behind my head with no problem. And that's not okay. And I found a chiropractor who did muscle testing, which was obviously a big push onto my path. And I found a lot of food sensitivities, which forced me to completely revamp the way that I ate. And that was over 12 years ago. So I've been on this very much detoxing process, which I see now was completely essential for me to be able to access the Akashic Records. I had needed 12 years to slowly up my frequency through food and diet and exercise and people. And my kids really helped. I got a huge psychic activation with both of my sons are very connected. And my real, very kind of unmistakable things started happening when I was pregnant with my first son. The very first one being we were out in Sedona and we took just a picture. My husband took a picture of me and my pregnant belly, and there's like a big blob, an orb. You can see it over my belly, exactly how he was laying. And at that point in my life, I desperately needed a photo of energy, and something clicked, and it was just a piece, another where I could kind of roll downhill, a little bit more of that validation.
Yeah. That makes so much sense, and I love how you put that, because it's exactly how I choose to look at my implant and how I choose to look at everything that challenges us within life, is that we don't have to find a reason for it, right? But if we don't, it's going to be a really weird reality to live in, right? When we think the life is happening to us, victim mentality, things of that nature, versus being able to say, okay, what did this implant do for me? Well, it really made me focus on like getting my chakras tuned and getting my body clean and all of these things. It also made me stay away from certain things. Like after a while, at that time in like 2017, I would still go to like clubs on the weekend and I would have a couple of drinks and things like that. And I would always wake up the next day with a headache. And so I was just like, this isn't worth it anymore. So I completely stopped drinking alcohol, stopped eating any amount of bad food. I was already pretty strict at that point with diet, but I started also getting much deeper into meditation, because that was the thing, is like this process of having those headaches every day was allowing me to stress myself out so much, because I was trying to play fix it. So that like eventually I had to learn the other side, which was, instead of trying to do, why don't you just be with it instead and actually start relaxing, man? Like that was like the year that I really started to realize like how upregulated I was, how much tension I had in my body. Like, again, I had been working out for, 6-7 years at that point. But at the same time, I hadn't been listening to my body. I hadn't been necessarily like listening to what foods were working well for me. I was just doing what I thought was healthy. And I was pushing it way too hard in the gym, like just way too hard. And I was getting tendonitis and all these other things. And, it was funny because when it happened, it was kind of like a series of events. Like the first thing that happened was in 2016. I was with my ex at that time. And I remember there was a Saturday where I woke up, and every Saturday is back and legs, right? That's what I do every Saturday. So I'll do pull-ups and I'll do squats. And so I woke up and I remember like I had a really tight back of my neck, like just everything was really tight. Didn't have a headache yet or anything like that. But I remember thinking like, okay, like today is definitely a day. And this happened all the time, Kathleen. This would happen literally at least once a week. I'd wake up, I'd feel insanely tight. I'd say, okay, I got to back off. It's just going to be a rest day. I'm just going to take care of myself. And then I would start foam rolling. I would start stretching. And then somewhere in the 30 to 45 minutes of doing that, I would convince myself that actually it's fine. I'll just work out different parts of my body. It'll be totally fine. So I did that. So I did pull-ups and legs, and the rest of the day was fine. Went to bed and woke up the next day with insane neck tension all in the front of my neck, which I'd never had before. And now I end up working with my friend Leah, and we're like moving my throat muscles around and just all this stuff that was like super uncomfortable. All the meanwhile, I'm still hitting the gym and doing all these things because that was my only area of being able to de-stress, or so I thought. Then a year later, then the headache happens, right? And it was kind of like the universe was gifting me these opportunities to be like, dude, slow down. Like, don't spend 4 hours a day working out. Like you're needed in other ways. Like, stop being so introverted, like let your magic out. And so I really see those events as happening for me and really allowing my metaphorical mess to turn into my mission, So I'm glad you mentioned that, because for a lot of people listening, you might be in that same boat right now.
So I love that so much, but I have to share with you because I have to show you what I saw when you were talking, because I don't know that, I don't think I've shared this with you before, but I know that I have told you that we've definitely had some past lives together, some indigenous time. And what I was shown was one of the roles that I played in an indigenous life was leading. I was allowed in the sweat lodges as a woman to lead some of that. And there was specifically an instance that I'm being shown of, it feels like Sundance. Have you heard of the Sundance Festival, where you passed out, but like pushed it, it's very much about pushing your edges, but you very much went a little bit past the edge. And that, it was the whole time that you were talking, it was just very funny because it was, I saw, and I always see with you, I always see all the fire. And so they see this, just this hot room, and the pushing and so determined. But again, I think what's funny is that, and as they're showing me, they're like, oh, and he was thrilled at the end. He said he had an amazing experience after he passed out.
Well, it's so funny you say that, because in my gene keys, I remember Rachel's gene keys, right? Like a part of it. And what I like about the gene keys is that for someone like me who can get myself so militaristic when it comes to my health and things like that, and can make it very stressful, make something that otherwise should be to benefit me into something very stressful. When Rachel read her gene keys, part of it was that like, you might not always eat the healthiest food, but as long as you enjoy it, it's going to be good for you. And so Rachel's like, oh my God, like this is so awesome. Like I knew it, right? Because she will she'll have like, pasteurized cheese every once in a while. Again, not a big deal. She's super healthy, right? But like I'll nerd out with her and be like, oh, you're having pasteurized cheese, huh? She's like, stop messing with me, right? So we play that joke with each other. But for me, after I had gone through all of that in 2017 and like started to calm myself down, then it became what my ego and like that fastness attached to was like, slow down more, right? So what started happening was then I started getting nervous to like push my body again and all these things, when in reality, it felt like I'm an Aries, right? It felt like I love pushing. I love stimulation. Like, yes, I love the other side too. And I love the first side that I found, right? And so in my gene keys, it basically says like, man, you got to push your body through really crazy, vigorous movement every day. That's what's going to keep you healthy. And I was like, thank fucking God. Like, you know how much permission that gave me? Because like a typical day for me will be at least 3 days a week, do a very high intense strength workout. I work out outside all year, which in Boston, right? Because you're close to me in Connecticut, right? Yeah. You're in Connecticut. Yeah. So it's like, like in the winters, it can get cold. And in the summers, it gets really hot and sweaty, And so I enjoy working out outside because I get my vitamin D and things like that. But I'll do that. And then when I come home, like I'll usually have fasted every morning. And then after I come home from that, I'll have my food, go through my work day. And then at night, I'll do the sauna and I'll do a cold shower. And like the cold shower is this time of year, get ice cold. And so that's like just my typical day, not including breath work, not including psychedelics, not including, all the other stuff that I can do that can be intense. And so, like that's a typical day for me. And it's funny because it did dawn on me the other day, like, man, like these are these are pretty intense things that not a lot of people do. And it's not like oh my goodness, like I do things other people don't do. It's just like, man, like you really are wired to like things that other people are like, dude, I don't know why you do that. And that's fine, right? Like everyone has their different interests, but it is really funny, like thinking into that, because that's definitely me.
I'd be curious what that gene key is, because I think I have it too. I know, I have a little bit of a different lifestyle because I have two boys. My sons are 5 and 2. But I need my hot yoga. Every morning, 6 a.m. I need that, but I can get home by 7:15 and I've had an hour of detox, of my meditation, and I get home, everybody in my house is still asleep, and then we can start the day. And then if I'm lucky, I'll try, do my breath work or like kind of a chiller yoga class in the end of the day. But that is a non-negotiable for me. I need to have a very vigorous physical practice every day. And I think for a lot of that, and it's extra when I'm doing a lot of readings. If I kind of add in for every reading, every hour that I do a reading or a set energy work session, I add in an extra hour and need an extra Epsom salt bath, an extra yin yoga class, because I'm processing so much of that energy through my own body, which is also why my system is sensitive. Some people can kind of ground energy and process it through them and ground it down into the earth. There's also some of us that transmute it. So I will take that energy in, and rather than just kind of disperse it, I will actually change it and project it back out, which is, a soul contract. It's something that I agreed to do when I came here. But it also is a lot on your physical body, because it's processing a lot of it's other people's dense energy that's processed through your system, not just your own. It was important that I had 12 years of figuring that out with my own body, so that when I was dealing with other people's energy too, I could take that into account.
Yeah, it's super important, right? Like it's super important, especially in this kind of space where you're working with clients and you're taking on some of their baggage and they're sharing things with you that are heavy. It's super important to have those practices, whatever they are, right? For each person, that really allow you to feel replenished. Like that's why at the end of every day, it's a sauna and cold shower for me. Like in the morning, it's my movement, my meditating, my breath work, my Tai Chi, all my supplements, things like that get me moving. And then at night, to calm down and release it all, it'll be the sauna, cold shower. And then there's this company, I don't have an affiliate code or anything for them, but they're called Fat Marshmallow. And this is their lip balm, but they have this whipped tallow body butter that is insane. It's like marshmallow. It's insane. Like for anyone listening, I highly recommend grab this stuff. So after I get out of the shower, I'll lather my whole body in that. And it's like the best feeling in the winter. You're like, man, I got my vitamin D today. I went outside. I detoxed in the sauna. I did a cold shower and strengthened all my cold shock proteins and everything. And now I'm all moisturized, and it's just the best feeling ever.
Add some gua sha with that moisturizer at the end too.
Yes.
My new thing in the evening has been, I have a PEMF mat that I sit on.
Oh, dope.
And my sister-in-law, I was so lucky to inherit it. She had one that she used personally, but then she worked with horses, and it's it works for a stallion. So I get to,
wow.
I'm not one to do things kind of on the low low setting. So I turn it all the way up, and I'm, convulsing in that chair. But I tell you, I think it really does something for your energy body. I think it really is helping to clear out my field and even expand my light body. There's something I'm trying to intuitively feel into it. It's only been a couple of months that I've been using it, but there's something really magical about that technology that's my new evening routine. It feels equally grounding as like an Epsom salt bath without as much work.
Yeah, the PEMF mats are awesome. Like my plan is to go on Alibaba soon and grab one, because I do the red light in the morning. I'll do like 20 minutes in front of the red light, and that thing is awesome. And I'll eat methylene blue before that too, because methylene blue is super good for mitochondrial support. And then the red light is, and when you put them together, it's like insane for your mitochondria. And so I've been doing that in the mornings, and that's fantastic. I'll do breath work and Tai Chi in front of the red light. Then I'll do my meditation once I'm all balanced and everything. And it's just so cool, right? Because these are the things that, this is like the equivalent of getting your oil changed at the right time in your car and making sure your tires are rotated. Like, it's like making sure that your vehicle to go experience life in is in tip-top shape. Because when your vehicle's in tip-top shape, there's a much better chance that your soul is able to express fully, and you're able to really tap into your unique gifts in life. And Kathleen, this has been amazing. I can't believe an hour's already flown by. I'm so excited to have you back on and keep riffing on all this stuff, but I want to make sure I give you an ample opportunity to tell people where they can find you, where they can sign up for appointments like I did. I mean, guys, I'm telling you, like, this literally changed my life. So Kathleen, where can people find you? Where can they connect with you and keep up to date on all the amazing stuff you're doing in the world?
Thank you so much, Ryan. It's always so great to chat with you. I am most active on Instagram. My handle is at Timeline Alchemy, timeline.alchemy. And again, my name is Kathleen Allen. I do medical intuition sessions, energy clearing sessions, Akashic Records readings. It's all kind of expanding. I think I've got a couple of new things coming down in the next month or two. So keep an eye out. But yeah, Ryan, it's always so wonderful to talk to you. I don't ever have such easy flowing conversations ever. So it's always such a blessing, pleasure.
Oh, I totally agree. It's like every time we talk, like literally hours just fly by, and I'm just so grateful to have you in my life, not only for the amazing stuff you've already assisted me with, but to continue learning from you and co-creating epic magic together. And I am so, so grateful. And guys, I hope wherever you are in the world, you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to reach out to Kathleen. If I didn't make it painfully obvious, she's been a absolutely amazing person in my life that has helped me when no one else could. And this is just the beginning too. We've only done one appointment together and that much happened. So make sure you reach out to her. Make sure you follow her. She's always putting out amazing content designed to help educate you around the topics that she discusses. And so wherever you are in the world, hope you're having the best day ever. And I'm sending you all my love to infinity and beyond. Much love, everybody. Peace.